It is now time to finish off our first ever two-part review as we look at the second part of the 1990 miniseries of It. So what's the big change in this part? Well, in the last part, it was fighting kids. Now those kids are all grown up, and they have to destroy it again. But this time they have to do it permanently, because clearly last time they didn't finish the job. And now, of course, we move to the full adult cast, which featured Richard Thomas, Annette O'Toole, John Ritter, Harry Anderson, Dennis Christopher, Tim Reed, and Richard Masur. And if you're watching this, you probably already watched part 1 of the review, and if you haven't, you should, but just in case you haven't, here's a quick recap. Basically, 7 kids called Loser Squad are being haunted by some kind of mysterious force in form of a clown monster named Pennywise. Eventually, they decide to kill said clown monster and they go down to the sewer and they seemingly get rid of it once and for all. But again, considering it's back in part 2, they didn't do a good enough job. And that's what we're going to get to now as we review part 2 of It, 1990. So part 2 begins in Derry, Maine in the year 1990, with Bill being the first to arrive back in town. He goes to the cemetery and visits Georgie's grave, where he's very quickly confronted by Pennywise for the first time in 30 years. Bill then goes to the library and reunites with Mike, and he reveals to Mike that he doesn't really remember much about what happened at all, but Mike will help him jog his memory, because Mike's the only one that remembers, since he's the only one that stayed in Derry. Richie's the next to come back into town, and he goes to the library to wait for Mike until he's confronted also by Pennywise, who splatters him with a good old-fashioned blood balloon. Meanwhile, Bill and Mike have refurbished Bill's old childhood bike called Silver, and they relive their childhood for a little bit. That doesn't last long though, as they pull out some trading cards, which are revealed to have Pennywise's face on it. Ben is the next to come back into town, and he goes and visits the old creek where a bunch of bullies are bullying some overweight kid, which obviously he relates to, and he helps said kid. Much like when he was a kid though, he also comes into contact with Pennywise near the sewer. Eddie is the next back in town, and he goes to a pharmacy he used to shop at as a kid, where he meets the old pharmacist who's now an old man who doesn't seem to remember much. The old man remembers him though, but then he's possessed by It and tells Eddie to get the hell out of there. The last back in town is Bev, who decides to go to her dad's house to see if he's still alive. Turns out some older woman now lives where they used to live though, and her dad has been dead for 5+ years. And oh, look at that, the old lady made her some tea, that's nice. Oh god, that's blood tea, and that is not a real old lady. Yeah, it turns out Pennywise is messing with her head, and the actual house I guess she was never in the first place, because it's been completely boarded up. Back in the UK, Bill's wife Audra is terrified of where he got off to, and she decides to book herself a plane ticket to America. The losers then finally all reunite at a Chinese restaurant, and after Bev faints and Eddie gets his memory jogged in an unpleasant fashion, they're actually able to have a pretty good time. While they're eating, they discuss Henry Bowers, who apparently after the events that took place in the sewer, confessed to all the murders and was locked away in an insane asylum. And at said insane asylum, Bowers is confronted by a vision of Pennywise on the moon, who tells him to go back to Derry and kill all the losers. Speaking of losers, Richie wants to leave and not really do anything about Pennywise, and Mike's like, yeah, it's all your guys' decision at the end of the day, you kind of fulfilled your promise just by coming back, and they all go to open their fortune cookies, which all unfortunately contain some not so good gifts from Pennywise. They retreat back to the library where Mike tries to get a hold of Stan to see where he is, but Mike finds out that Stan committed suicide. Bill then remembers that while they were down in the sewers, Stan saw the deadlights of It, which are the same thing that turned Henry Bowers insane and killed Victor and Belch. It then confronts him with Stan's severed head and starts attacking the library before they all stand in a circle and it backs off. Meanwhile, back at the insane asylum, It confronts Henry Bowers using the body of Belch and helps Bowers to escape. The losers then go back to a hotel where they realize that It comes out every 30 years to feed, and that the citizens of Derry just blissfully ignore it every year because they're also somewhat controlled by It. Speaking of being controlled by It, Audra has arrived in town and she's almost in Derry when she stops to ask someone for directions, but turns out she asked the wrong someone. Later on, when Mike goes back to his room in the hotel, he's attacked by Henry Bowers, who came in through the window, and Henry stabs him with the pocket knife that It gave him. Ben and Beverly then have some alone time, and Bev reveals that she knows it was Ben who wrote that poem about her all those years ago, and they start to make out, except it wasn't really Bev. Yeah, how's that clown tongue taste, my dude? They then hear the ruckus going on in Mike's room, and they're able to save him at the last minute, and Eddie actually kills Henry Bowers by turning the knife back on him. They then all drive Mike to the hospital, where he barely survives. Ben and Bev then make out again, except it's actually Beverly this time, and Bill goes into the hospital room to see Mike. Mike gives Bill the silver earrings that they lost down in the sewers all those years ago, and he reveals that he actually went down to the sewers 10 years ago to go and find them, and the experience actually changed his life and gave him new purpose. The others are all fixing to leave, but Bill's like, nah, I gotta go down there and kill it with or without you guys, and the rest of them are like, alright, fine, we're coming too. They're only a lucky 5 instead of a lucky 7 this time, but they make their way back into the sewer just like last time, where Bill discovers a purse, which he quickly realizes is his wife Audra's. They make their way to the area where they confronted the monster last time, and Pennywise appears as a vision and reveals that they haven't seen his true self, and they better turn back before they do. They then realize that its true form must be somewhere in the sewers, and they venture on to look for it. They finally come across a door and go inside and see a lot of things tied up in spider webs, including Audra. Wait a minute, spiderwebs? Yep, that's right. If you have arachnophobia, I'll give you a couple seconds to look away. 1, 2, yep, there it is. It is it. Its true form is a giant-ass spider. Beverly then tries to shoot the earrings at it, but she misses because I guess she's not as good of a shot as she used to be. Bill, Ben, and Richie then get entranced by the deadlights, and Eddie tries to do what he did last time, using his inhaler to spray acid at it, but it doesn't work and he gets picked up by it. Beverly, however, goes and gets the earrings again, and even though she's not even looking this time, she hits it right in the deadlights and wounds it. But I guess it was squeezing Eddie like super hard because he actually dies pretty much immediately. That sucks. And the others are pissed, and they follow the wounded spider into its lair and just basically beat the shit out of it before ripping its heart out, killing it once and for all. And to wrap things up, Mike recovers in the hospital and makes plans to leave Derry after he gets out. Richie stars in a new movie with a man who looks apparently a lot like Eddie, and Ben and Bev get married and plan to have a kid. So things are going decently well for everybody, except for Bill, as Audra has not recovered at all from what happened in its lair. As they're about to leave Derry, he makes one last attempt to bring her back as they get on his old bike one more time and ride into town. And they almost get hit by a couple cars, but believe it or not, it actually works, and she completely recovers from her state, and then her and Bill kiss in the middle of town to end the film. So overall thoughts on part 2. I thought it was weaker than part 1, but not in all aspects. I thought the cast was very good. The acting of the adults, I think they had decent good chemistry, maybe not as good as the kids, but I still think they had very good chemistry, and the acting in this part was very strong. As far as the plot itself goes, it wasn't as interesting, but maybe it's just because we've seen it, no pun intended, before. You know, it was kind of a rehash of part 1, because I mean, they are doing the same thing. They're going down into sewers and killed a clown. And yeah, we do get to see, you know, its true form, which was very, you know, badly animated, but I'll give it a pass because it was 1990. It was a product of its time. But I think it's just because it's kind of a repeat just with them as adults, and it's not really anything new. Maybe it's just the source material in general. Maybe just the source material of the second part, because it's a repeat, isn't as strong as part 1. I mean, it's the same with the Hollywood movies, too. If I ever review the Hollywood movies, which I think I will, we'll get into that then as well, but in the Hollywood movies, It Chapter 2 is not as strong as Chapter 1, in my opinion, and honestly, I think it's just the source material of the second part is just simply not as strong as the first part. It's not that it's bad, it's just, you know, there's not much fresh. We've seen this before. And I said in part 1 that this only really gets remembered nowadays for Tim Curry's performance as It. And don't get me wrong, it still deserves to be remembered for that, because Tim Curry did an incredible job. But I still think the other actors should get credit. Both the child and adult actors in both parts did a very good job, you know. For a 1990, fresh out of the 80s, you know, made for television miniseries, we'll call it, I wasn't expecting much from the acting going into this, but it was very strong by both the adult actors and the kid actors, and I think they should all get a lot more credit for what they did with this film. But in conclusion, is this worth checking out? I think so, yeah. I think it's still worth checking out. It's not as good as the Hollywood films, especially the first Hollywood film. Part 1 was tremendous. Chapter 2 was good too, but Part 1 was just incredible. But I still think this is held up decently well. And again, Tim Curry does an incredible job, but I think there's more than just him in this. I really do. So if you ever have a chance, if you ever have an inkling to watch these movies for yourself, I think you should. Honestly, I really think you should. I think they hold up a lot better than people give them credit for. But next week on the channel, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go with a movie that probably doesn't hold up as well, as we are going to review our first ever Hulk Hogan film on the channel with Mr. Nanny. God help us all. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for my 2-part review of the mini-series of It. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they're in the description. Thank you to all 80 of my patrons for supporting me and my channels and everything I do. I appreciate you guys. With all that being said, though, my name is Noah Taff. This concludes my 2-part review of the 1998 mini-series of It, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.